I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Movie Star Magic. And this week we're going to be looking at the illustrious career of Angela Basset. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is talk about actors and what makes them great. The first half of the show, I talk about the sort of overall career of an actor and break it down into essentially 3 chapters and see how their sort of career evolves, the type of roles that they play, and then also sort of pick a defining movie, a defining role in each of those chapters. And in the second half of the video, I try to figure out what is their defining feature. What is that one thing that makes them unique, that makes them a movie star, that they've been able to bring through all of their roles. There's a reason why there's only one Angela Basset, and that's what I want to figure out in my defining feature. But without further ado, let's jump into the first part of the video, the sort of career arc of Angela Basset, and sort of define how she became a movie star and how she has evolved in the type of roles that she's played. And in the first chapter, I'm deeming this one the Firecracker. There are certain actors that early on in their careers you sort of immediately know who is that. You want to sort of figure out who is it, the type of roles that they are taking, oftentimes these supporting roles. You just see them and you go, either that's a movie star, or you go, that person was incredible, I want to see more of them. And that's sort of the sort of early Firecracker performances. So I'm thinking of, her role in Boys in the Hood, or City of Hope, or even in Malcolm X, where she's not the star of these movies. She's oftentimes a supporting character, or even, fifth, sixth bill, things like that. But she always pops. There's always sort of a sense of ferocity, intensity, and maturity that she brings. But because she's in these limited scenes, she does have sort of this firecracker persona, because she is so energetic, because she brings the movie so much life whenever she's on screen. And in those sort of early roles, it's evident that she is a very talented actress. But it's not until her defining role, I think, in this chapter, which is What's Love Got to Do with It. This is her sort of big Oscar sort of type movie. However, early in these actors' careers, oftentimes in the sort of the first chapter, they figure out how to become a movie star. But what's fascinating about Angela Basset is actually in this first chapter, she has these sort of interesting spurts, but her big sort of role that sort of breaks her out as a lead is in this sort of transformative role. That it's not a role like a Jerry Maguire for Tom Cruise, where it's very much a classic Tom Cruise performance. Angela Basset here is playing Tina Turner in very much I'd say a not traditional Angela Basset performance. She transforms in that respect, and she's terrific in that. Tina Turner is always this sort of ever-present, always smiling sort of figure, and I think she totally nails that with subtle things. For example, always smiling, always having sort of this agape mouth is one of the sort of few of the smaller things that she does to really transform in this character. This is a traditional biopic in the sense that it's a very sort of traditional tragic singer story. That being said, this really was sort of pioneered in the 90s, and this is one of the sort of early ones that we had. Of course, we see these all the time nowadays. Every year there seems to be some sort of Oscar movie, a musician type thing that always about a tragic singer. Of course, we're getting Elvis later in the year. That seems to be following a similar mold. But really, Angela Basset to pave the road for this in many respects, and helped also define the fact that the movie is interesting, but it's interesting because of its sort of dynamite 2 leads in Lawrence Fishburne and Angela Basset. So it's interesting to see her have these sort of firecracker roles and then come out with What's Love Got to Do with It, get her an Oscar nomination, and sort of show her like, hey, I'm not just this sort of supporting role, I can do this lead, and does so with a transformative performance. However, in the second chapter, which I am deeming the middle-aged heroine, I think she really starts to define herself as the Angela Basset persona, as the movie star. That she's not this really terrific actress that can transform, and she's actually sort of her own unique, charismatic sort of power and figure in that regard. That oftentimes when we're talking about these movie stars, whether it be Wesley Snipes or Kurt Russell, they're good at transforming and they can do transformative performances, but they're not, we're not covering Christian Bale or Gary Oldman in the series, very particularly, even though they're movie stars in their own respect. Because I want to talk about, when we're seeing a Tom Cruise movie, that's very much a Tom Cruise movie, and he has his own sort of extra flair. And I think Basset, early on in her career, did the transform herself, show that she's a terrific actress, but it really wasn't until sort of the mid-90s where we actually sort of understood what an Angela Basset performance and an Angela Basset movie would mean, and what she brought as her personal charismatic persona. And I think in this sort of early chapter, I would say post What's Love Got to Do with sort of Strange Things, but definitely sort of Waiting to Exhale and Vampire in Brooklyn, and then of course How Stella Got Her Groove Back, which is my defining role in this chapter. Maybe her defining role period. Of course, she's well known in What's Love Got to Do with It, and in Boys in the Hood and Malcolm X. These are classic movies, but among fans of the romantic comedy genre, I think How Stella Got Her Groove Back is a sort of classic in many regards. I almost went with Waiting to Exhale because that's got its own sort of cult status and appreciation in that regard, but I do think How Stella Got Her Groove Back is a sort of classic Angela Bassett performance. But in that, I titled this chapter The Middle-Aged Heroine because she is sort of unique in that regard, that most of these romantic comedies feature this sort of 20-year-old, young, quirky, plucky kind of a woman. And if it is sort of, sometimes you'll have a woman in their 30s, and if that is the case, it'll be she's 31 and she's this uber successful businesswoman, but she hasn't had a chance to settle down or find the right man until she does. Think of something like, Sandra Bullock and The Proposal. But the truth of the matter is, in this movie, How Stella Got Her Groove Back, what's interesting about it, the sort of twist that they bring to it, is that she's 40 years old, that she is definitely middle-aged, that she hasn't really had a chance to sort of settle down, that she's definitely past her sort of prime, sort of youthful years. And then, of course, the story being even more complex being the fact that she's dating a 20-year-old man. And that's a really complex story even today, about the sort of, I guess, personal ethics and morals around if it's even an appropriate relationship. But what I think Basset does such a terrific job is make this movie that has this sort of oddly complex and strange and dynamic at the center of it, make it lighthearted, make it make sense through some of her charisma, but her ability to do two things. On one hand, to sort of understand and get within the character, but also to sort of bring the sort of fierce independence that she has within a lot of her roles. So, Stella's a character here where I think Basset does a terrific job at explaining to us through her acting that she's a character that is maybe someone who's had to grow up a little bit early, that this actually makes sense why a 40-year-old would be attracted in this case to a 20-year-old, because she had some of those years sort of taken away from her. So we see this woman that's very put together, that's very sort of serious and professional, that needs the vacation, then sort of on the whim takes the vacation, and then we see her really start to loosen up, and you see how much she definitely needed this vacation, which makes sense. We have this young 20-year-old man who is someone that brings it out of her, and we see that relationship sort of makes sense because of what he's able to do and sort of bring her back to her youth in that regard. But the movie also doesn't shy away from some of the more complex questions of immaturity and things like that. So on one hand, you have that sort of woman who's very put together, that's sort of traditional, that's very mature, and then we see Basset actually sort of unravel and become a little bit more interesting in the regards that, she actually can have fun, she can have a little bit more of a bubbly personality. That's interesting. But of course, on the other side, which is really interesting about it, of course, is the reaction to once they sort of have this relationship, where she actually starts to display her fierce independence, which I think she's so great at, Basset as a performer, just in general, but particularly here in How Stella Got Her Groove Back, is her ability just to be like, what, this is me, this is what I think, and her ability just to sort of very bluntly, very directly, not sort of rude, but serious and with passion, sort of tell it how it is. She doesn't care about how other people view her. She has some sort of personal doubts within her own personal life, but when it comes to standing up for herself, she is excellent at doing that. So How Stella Got Her Groove Back is a really traditional, I think, role for her, because she's able to show both her ability to be put together and then also have a little bit of fun, but then also stand up for her decisions and be this sort of fiercely independent presence that she's been able to craft. And How Stella Got Her Groove Back is sort of a complex, slightly dated story, a little bit just because the sort of dynamics are hard to parse through. But that being said, Bassett's performance is the reason why I think this movie still holds up and is a movie that really signifies her growth and her ability to really create a whole sort of Angela Bassett genre in and of herself. Then in the third chapter, I'm going to call this sort of later period Angela Bassett performances, I'm going to call this chapter the sort of guiding sage. This is very much similar to a lot of the anchors we've covered, where they're the sort of hot leading sort of star persona, and that lasts for 10 or 20 years, and then eventually they start to transition into more of the supporting roles. These more of the old veteran kind of a status, the elder stateswoman, I guess, in this case. But I call this one the guiding sage because oftentimes she's playing either mothers, in the case of Aquila and the Bee, Sunshine State, Black Panther, or she's sort of playing these government officials. Think of Olympus Has Fallen or Mission Impossible Fallout, or even This Means War, I think, if I remember that one correctly. But so she is sort of these more... It's interesting to see her sort of in her later career lean into that sort of maturity that she has. You know, she is an actress like a Gene Hackman or a Meryl Streep that has always seemed, you know, old and wise beyond her years and never seemed super young. You know, she has always seemed mature and put together, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I think, you know, in terms of picking a defining role for this period, the sort of mom government official type of a period, I had to go with the one that combines the two, that being Black Panther. Of course, the movie was a huge phenomenon when it came out and still is, and it'll be interesting to see how they sort of tackle the sequel, which is a very interesting movie, which Angela Bassett will be in, and the thinking maybe will be she'll have a greater role. But what's fascinating about this is that even though she's a supporting role, very much in an ensemble with many great actors and many different characters, she stands out. And I think a worse filmmaker would have sort of, you know, we've seen this a million times before, but the superhero's mom really doesn't have much to do, or is, you know, dead for the case of a plot point in something like Batman. But Angela Bassett here actually does do quite a bit with her few scenes, that she is this sort of figurehead, that she's a part of the sort of, you know, queen, you know, or mother to the king, his closest advisor, and it really helps convey, I think, a lot of the themes of the movie, along with someone like Michael B. Jordan, that sort of idea of internationalism versus isolationism, and helping your own people versus sort of staying on your own versus sharing your gift with the world. It's a fascinating sort of dilemma that's at the heart of the movie, and I think Bassett's able to sort of communicate to the audience some of that complexity in her small roles, because she's of course one person who is the mother of Chadwick Boseman, so she wants to sort of understand him and cater to him and his needs as her son. That being said, there's also the sort of battle of the fact that she wants to keep tradition, that she is the sort of figurehead of this entire country, and that she has a lot of responsibility in that, and she's not going to just give up that responsibility without a sort of reasonable and thoughtful conversation. So in this sort of later chapter of this sort of serious, mature government official, but also seeing that sort of mom-like role, I thought Black Panther, of course, being such a terrific movie and an iconic movie, I had to mention it here. And now, just talking about the defining feature of Angela Bassett and her movies, what makes her special and what she's able to bring in so many of the different layers and elements of her movies. Of course, the title of the video is the defining feature. This is Angela Bassett, The Unexposed Nerve. And I say The Unexposed Nerve because I think her performances oftentimes are these sort of women who are put together that, you know, like an unexposed nerve. If it's just left alone, there's no sort of issues. But if you sort of just prod it a little bit, it could be intensely emotional, can be intensely painful, and make an intense impact. So when I think about her performances, oftentimes it's like given to us as someone who is very easily identifiable, very easily sort of put into a box. You know, in the case of Weighing to Exile, her life is sort of, you know, on autopilot. She has a sort of great husband, the great kids, good job, nice house, you know, living a good life. But of course, the events of that movie happen. Her husband leaves her for a white woman, excuse me, and then it's sort of all hell breaks loose, and the sort of intense emotional betrayal of that, and you have that incredible sort of lighting the car on fire scene where it's just like, wow, this is just an incredible sequence here in this movie. And it's because Bassett is sort of giving us this sort of interesting trick, this where she gives us this character that is very put together, that is very sort of business driven, in something like, you know, how Sal got her groove back. She's got her stuff together, right? And then the next element being, but if you actually sort of look a little, half a centimeter deep, you realize that no, this is actually a woman with intense emotional baggage and struggle and complexity. And that's what's interesting about her characters. As she's so great at putting on this sort of front of put togetherness, of responsibility, of maturity, but she also doesn't allow that to sort of be taken down a notch. That she allows these characters to be a little bit more three-dimensional. In the case of something like Black Panther, she is this sort of stately, queen-like figure. That being said, when she's sort of confronted and when she has to sort of decide about the sort of and understand the complexities of tradition versus appeasing her son, while also in one part grieving the loss of her husband, there's all these sort of extra layers that she's able to bring forth, even in a small role like that. So when we see her in these sort of main roles, and someone like a Tina Turner, for example, which I haven't talked about too much yet, but it is another terrific performance. Even something like, Sunshine State, I think is the best time, because I haven't talked about that at all. But Sunshine State is a movie where she's trying to come back to her hometown after being sort of exiled as being the sort of pregnant prom queen, and she wants to sort of put together this sort of veneer and face of success and of understanding, but then of course she has so many incredible unresolved things that she has to deal with. So there's so many. So that's what I think of when I think of an Angela Bassett movie. I think that's her defining feature. It's just her ability to put together this sort of classic, put together kind of a role. And oftentimes she'll do that in a movie like Olympus Has Fallen. And we won't get much further after that. And she's good at this sort of traditional, mature, strong, independent, don't want to mess with her kind of a woman. Mission Impossible Fallout, one of the best line readings of the decade is "That's the job," which is just a classic sort of, yes, this is how it's going to get done. This is the truth. This is the blunt factor of it. But what I think is so interesting about an Angela Bassett movie, when I think about that, when she's actually able to have a sort of three-dimensional character and she's not the sort of supporting role, is that she'll still put that government official kind of professionality in the upfront, but because she's the main character, we actually understand some of the multitudes of her character, and Bassett's able to play all those different sides. She's able to do the meltdown and Waiting to Exile. She's able to do the sort of fierce comeback in something like How Style Guy or Groove Back, or Tina Turner be sort of emotionally raw and damaged and then try to get out of this abusive relationship and see that sort of spark dwindle and then I'd spark back up in the story of Tina Turner. So there's so many sort of different elements of an Angela Bassett movie, but that was something that sort of really stuck with me when rewatching and watching for the first time a lot of her movies. And she's someone that I don't think we think of oftentimes as like a classic movie star, or someone that often gets studied like a Tom Cruise or Meryl Streep. That being said, she is such a fascinating movie star. She is got her own sort of subgenre that she's able to craft, and every time I see her in a movie, I know that at the very least we'll get a great performance out of her. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on your favorite Angela Bassett movies and just your thoughts on Angela Bassett in general. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.